Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power of Man podcast. My name is Rory Paquette. I am, as always, your very grateful host. Thank you so much for being here today, for tuning in, for listening to all of our episodes. Folks, thank you for everything that you do. All of your liking, your sharing, your subscribing, all your comments. We've had thousands of DMs in the last month. It's been insane. Thank you so much, though, for sharing all of that, all of the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that you wanted to say to us. We listen to every single one of them. We read every one of them. I reply to everyone that I can. So I'm working on some. So hang in there if you haven't gotten your reply yet. Just hang tight because you will be getting one. Folks, this is the place where we talk to husbands and fathers primarily, of course, and we're all about the three principles of the power man, which is protect, provide, and lead your families to prosperity. Uh, we have a great guest with us today, and I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. Before that, you all know what we have to do. We got to pay a couple of bills. So here we go. Let me take a sip of my preferred beverage. Fantastic stuff. You guys all know what we're drinking. That's right. It's Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Go check them out, folks. This stuff is absolutely the best. Deep, dark, rich, bold, beautiful, just like my wife. Absolutely fantastic stuff. It is a beautiful cup of joe that they brew up over there. They do all the right things for all the right reasons, and they support veterans, which is one of the many reasons why we support them. You all know how important veterans are here at the Power of Man. Freedom Hill Coffee gets that too. So go take a look. Look them up at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Let me get one more sip of this fine stuff so I can keep up with this young man in front of me. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. We'll be drinking that throughout the show. Folks, at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram, tell them Power of Man sent you. All right, here we go. So let's get to our fantastic guest today. This gentleman has so much to unpack. We may have to do this in 3 or 4 episodes. I'm not sure. But please welcome to the program, teaching Christians how to live a 7-day practical faith, Cecil Taylor. Cecil, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Rory. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really delighted to speak to everybody in the audience today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks for making time for us today. Cecil, you have so much going on, brother. You've got 4 books that I'm sure we're going to talk about. You're a podcaster. You've got a ministry. Tell everybody who is Cecil Taylor. What are you about, and why are you here today, sir?
Yeah, sure. Well, uh, not to go too far back, but I started off as a preacher's kid. And so that gives the paradigm for everything, right? That I started off with that. And I always grew up in the church, and I taught adult Sunday school throughout my whole life. I spent 30 plus years working in church youth ministry. So all those experiences led me to eventually want to go outside the walls of my church. And the driver was that people would tell me, I can do this Christian stuff on Sundays, but the rest of the week is hard. And I kept thinking about that. And eventually I felt a call from the Holy Spirit to not leave my church, but to start dropping different volunteer activities because I was really engaged. And man, the Spirit was praying them out of my hands, one finger at a time, opening those things up. Even youth ministry had to go away to start a new ministry to teach Christians how to live a 7-day practical faith. It's a cross-denominational ministry because I don't really get into theology, I get into practice. And I think that's something we all struggle with is how do we actually put our faith into practice? I started with doing just like small group videos because that's what I knew. And I would do stuff on YouTube and things like that. I thought nobody read books anymore. I was disabused of that notion along the way. So
Sure.
I realized, video kind of can go, out the mind after you've watched it. So I wanted something sticky, right? Something people could take away, read over and over, remember what it was that I said. So I started writing books as a complement to the videos, and eventually it became a video to complement the book, right? Turned around. But then I started podcasting, and the podcast is shaped differently over the years. But right now it's called Practical Faith Academy. And what I do is I bring other people alongside me to talk about their faith journeys, whether it's wherever they are. Most recently, I had a teacher on. I have somebody coming up who does a lot of caregiving, right? So that it's wherever they are in life. How are you applying your faith? What's hard about faith? what's very specific to your situation about faith. And I get a lot of great feedback about it because there's some very interesting stories that come out, and a lot of tips, a lot of usefulness that people can take away.
Nice, nice. You have, I mean, all those things you touched on, of course. I mean, we could go any direction we want, of course, but you do talk about living a 7 day practical faith. And I know you touched on that, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about, how that works, what that really means to people, and so on and so forth, the work that you do there.
Yeah, sure. In fact, the the first question, Rory, that I always ask on my podcast is, what does 7 day practical faith mean to you? And it's interesting to get the answers back because it's all different, but it does usually fall under the vein, and I see it this way too, that if we are focused only on Sundays and not on applying it the rest of the week, we're not really living as Jesus intended us to. We're supposed to carry it out, and we're supposed to be all the way through and through. One thing that I talked about recently to somebody was in James, it talks about looking in the mirror and walking away and forgetting who you are. If that's what we do, if we only look in the mirror on Sundays and we forget who we are the rest of the week and whose we are, then we're not going to live life the way that we should. And I believe that Jesus is a very practical leader. He didn't intend everything to be theology and ivory tower. That's not what he talks about, right? He talks about very simple things and going out and how you treat other people, how you love God and love neighbor. He boils it down and really bores into us on relationships and how we represent ourselves, being the light of the world. All those kinds of themes are ones that I think are very practical and resonate with a 7 day practical faith. Now, a lot of people think it just means, well, I need to pray every day. I need to read scripture every day, right? And those are great things. I don't disabuse anybody of spiritual disciplines, right? But I think there's another level that those lead us to, which is doing life with the Spirit. So a breakthrough for me is, especially when I first got into ministry, but I think I've always been like this. I keep thinking about doing things for God. I got to do this for God. I got to give this to God, that kind of thing. And I finally got this message that said, what I really want is to do life with you. I want to do it together. And that has changed so much for me, is to realize the Spirit is with us. What a gift we have of the Spirit's presence with us to do life every day. So I try to look at it that way, that when I go into the day, it's not just me. I'm going into it with the best partner possible.
Wow. I love that outlook. Let me ask you this: as you work with people, okay, in that practical sense, um, I don't want to say just how easy is it because I'm sure people run into problems, but what uh, what sort of I guess what sort of obstacles do people run into on this, and how do you get past them? Because it's just not that easy. A lot of people are going to say in response to just
Sure.
start living, a godly life all week. Because hey, we don't live in necessarily a godly world, unfortunately, and you got sometimes you got to get down and dirty. What do you say to folks, who are trying and trying to get past those obstacles?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot to be said for trying to be consistent, and we know that we're not consistent people. A lot of people like their routine and are able to achieve it. I can't. I'm trying to do a read through the Bible in a year plan right now. Or actually, it's not even read through the whole Bible. It's just read through the Gospels in a year, and I'm off base. It's April, and I'm 2 months behind already, right? So it doesn't mean that I guess I get worried a little bit when we think we have to step on certain stones every day, right? I think
Mm,
if you expect that of yourself, you're going to get disappointed pretty quickly. I think it's the persistence, the consistency of trying to get back to it, to being aware, when am I getting off track? Um, and we get busy. Our jobs take us away. We have conflict in our lives. There's the news cycle that I don't even want to think about. There's all sorts of things that get us distracted. And so it's always, how can I get back to the main goal? And how can I, at least on a daily basis, touch base with God, touch base with the Holy Spirit, and just a few minutes of reflection, meditation, just while you're driving, in the shower, wherever it is. I think best in the shower myself. I get the best ideas. I come out, hey, that was work. I'm going to jot
Write
that
that
down
down.
because I'm
There you
going to give
go.
myself credit for doing some work in the shower there. So, but wherever it is for you, just try to be a little bit reflective. Where am I now? I will say one thing that helps me also personally. Um, I don't know why it took my wife and me more than 30 years to figure this out, but we started praying together every morning and making that one of our rituals. There are days that there's a doctor's appointment or what have you that throws everything off and we don't get it done, but we miss it. We miss it when we don't do it. And there's been a real power of putting that into our marriage. Um, Sometimes you have a fight the night before, right? And then you're praying the next day, Lord, help our marriage.
Mhm.
And it really does help things. But sometimes we're praying with for whatever's on our mind or so forth. And I think just that start to the day. I think if I was doing it on my own, I'd probably skip it, right? This way there's an accountability and there's somebody else partnering with you to
Mhm.
say, hey, it's time to pray. Let's go do it. So I think maybe you can map that in your life to do I have somebody that I'm accountable to? Uh, some accountability buddy, right? that I can rely on to help me stay on course. So those are a couple ideas there.
That's such a great answer, and I'm glad that you brought up your wife. When we talk about men staying on the path,
Hmm.
trying to become better tomorrow than we are today, things like this, marriage, kids, parenting, career, work, the daily fires that have to be put out, crisis management, all of
Yeah.
these things are, in the forefront. They're all right there in front of our face, and we have to deal with all of them all day.
Hmm.
And you talk about all those things I just mentioned, basically, in other books, other programs, and so on. I know that in particular, you've done a lot of work with marriage and parenting.
Yes.
And I think you have something, the five C's of marriage,
Yeah.
and then
I
you've
want
got a
to.
book on parenting. Either one of those that maybe you want to talk about a little bit, tell the
Well,
audience about.
let's follow down the marriage path for a
Okay,
little bit.
sure.
And I came up with this. I kind of knew it instinctively, but I wrote it down for a message I gave when I officiated someone's wedding a couple of years ago. And I talked about the five C's of marriage. So I wanted to share that today. The first one is Christ centered. So all these start with C, Christ centered, to put Christ in the center of your marriage. And let me tell you something, Rory. I'm coming up on our 40th anniversary. We're coming up in
Wow.
September. Um, we would,
Congratulations.
thank you. It is an achievement, believe me.
Mhm.
Um, and I believe I would not be married if Christ were not in the center of my marriage. And I'll give you one example. There's many, many, because we all have just a lot of things that happen. But we had a crisis in our marriage, and I talk about it in my book, The Next Thing. So, with her permission, so it's not a secret I'm revealing here. But my wife has tried to commit suicide 10 times.
Oh,
And the book really starts on the day right after her first suicide attempt when I'm putting her in a psychiatric hospital. And we can talk about that aspect later. But the the point I want to make is that when she went into the psych hospital, one thing we discovered very quickly is many men immediately leave their wives when that happens. They immediately say, look, in sickness and in health, but I didn't sign up for crazy, right? And they're gone.
right.
So I determined I didn't want to do that because I still love my wife. And I didn't want my kids to think I'm going to bail if somebody doesn't do exactly what I want, how I want. I felt like how I treated my wife would reflect to my kids on how I would be treating them. So I stuck with it. But, 10 times, 10 times, Rory, it's a lot.
Wow.
And it didn't always have to be a suicide attempt, right? Depression is a terrible thing, and it leads to a lot of bad incidents and arguments and things like that, right? I always had to come back to Christ being in the center of my marriage and what was God's will for me to was it for me to leave, for me to be there? What was the best thing for my kids? Always looking for the Spirit's guidance. So, and now we can see that together, right? She's a lot better now, and she can see with me the same thing, turning to Christ in the center of our marriage. So I think that's one that's very essential. Second is companions first. Companions first. So, we think of romance and everything. I can tell you after 40 years, romance is not the same as when we first started dating. But we were always friends. We were friends before we started dating. And beyond that, it goes even beyond friendship. It's companion. You're walking through life with somebody else. Don't you want a good companion? If you were going to go around the world, you would want a good companion on that journey. You wouldn't want to have somebody that by the time you got halfway around, you were looking to bail from.
Sure.
So have a good companion and focus on being companions first. That doesn't mean you do everything together. We have different interests, but sometimes I'll sit down and watch cooking shows with her. Now I like them. Yeah, we try to find things that we could do together, but there's things we do separately. But I think my children have seen this too. Like, why did you ever stick with mom through all the crazy? And they can see your companions. That's why you were able to survive it as well. So the third thing is custom made. Custom made. So, we think about that perfect person. Are we going to meet the one? And I don't really believe in the one. I think there's many, many people that you could be married to. But the the idea is, Rory, you don't have to be the best husband in the world. You have to be the best husband for your wife. And wives don't have to be the best wives in the world. They have to be the best wife for their husband. That means being a student of the other person, to know how they tick, to know how to, what their preferences are. There are things that I didn't know when I got married. You don't know all this stuff. You learn it. It unfolds as you learn each other. For example, I would never throw my wife a surprise party because I learned along the way she hates surprises. That would not be a good event for her. So some guys I see them, they throw a surprise party for their wife, and I hope that works well for their wives. For my wife, it would be a disaster to throw a surprise party. So we try to learn what is the best thing this person needs out of me. And luckily, she is such a great wife for me because I don't think everybody could be my wife, and I don't think everybody could be her husband. But we are right for each other because we've learned each other and we've adapted. So the fourth thing is to change together. And some of this is luck, I'll admit. But what we found throughout our marriage is we'll be going along and we'll say, I feel differently about this now. And the other person will say, yeah, I do too. And I don't think that's just random. I think it's from us sharing thoughts along the way and reacting to different things together. And then we start to change. For example, when we decided to leave a church we were in after 35 years, we really made the decision together. In fact, at one point we're sitting there just kind of talking about it. I said, we've already made the decision, haven't we? We already have. So let's just go forward with it. So changing together is very important. If one goes off in a very different direction and the other can't follow for some reason, that's where tension comes in. And then
Sure.
the fifth thing, which I love, is I call compounded love. So think about interest and the compounding of interest, right? You're not making 5% on that savings or whatever the amount, maybe it's a lot lower today. But anyway, say 5%. It's not just on the amount you have there, right? It's because last year there was a 5% that was built on top of the prior year's 5% and so forth.
Right.
So love compounds. I can I can literally say that I love my wife now more than I've ever loved her because I know the history. I know how we've gotten here. We all know why we each have a weight gain. We understand exactly what all happened to get to the point where we are. And every event, we've tried to use it for love and to compound the love and our investment in each other. So again, the five C's: Christ-centered, companions first, custom made, change together, and compounded love.
Wow. I mean, there's nothing on that list that you can disagree with. It all absolutely makes sense. Holy cow. So you put those in practice, and then, I mean, the idea there is you put them in practice, and obviously it helps your marriage out. But those are guidelines to kind of live by. as you're pursuing the 7 day practical faith as well. It's all kind of
Yeah.
works in tandem with itself.
Well, you raise a really good point because I think we express our faith in our marriage. We express our faith in our parenting, right? So they're not separate things. When I wrote the parenting book as the fourth, after writing three books on putting faith into practice, people were like, well, that's really a different book. I said, I don't think it is because it's a different way that you put your faith into practice. I put it into my home.
Hmm.
That's one of the places I live 7 days a week, right? So it's the only place I live except when I'm traveling, right? So um, yeah, I really believe that that all ties together, and it ties to your parenting as well. If we want to go ahead and kind of
Yeah,
walk
for
down
sure.
that path for a moment,
Absolutely.
that uh, seeing things together, like I said, is one of the keys of my book, Unison Parenting. It's the long title is Unison Parenting, the comprehensive guide to navigating Christian parenthood with one voice.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
unison means like unison singing. My wife is actually a singer and a composer. And so I asked her, say, why does a composer use unison singing, which is when all the voices sing the same note at the same time? It's not harmony, they all sing the exact same note. And she said, you do it when you want to emphasize the text. You don't want to emphasize the music, you want to get the message across. That's what we want to do as parents. If we are giving if we're not singing off the same page, we're not giving the same message. We want to give a consistent message to the child about whatever it happens to be. And that starts with us being in agreement. And I know there's folks on here that have gone through different things. They may be in marriage right now and are struggling with their parenting. They
Yeah.
may be in a divorce situation. I'll give you an example of somebody, you can't get away from it if you have kids, really, unless you're really negligent. I was at a national conference and I was doing a book signing on unison parenting. And as soon as my little booth opened, this lady just rushes up and says, my marriage is in trouble because of parenting. And that didn't surprise me because statistically, 20% of divorces happen because of parenting disputes. So it's not unusual for parenting to ripple into the marriage, parenting disputes. But she said, it got to the point where my husband and I were completely opposed on how we were going to raise our 8-year-old daughter to the point that he was telling her not to listen to what I was saying. He
Oh,
was disrespecting and dishonoring me. And he finally came to grips with that and actually went to their daughter and said, I want to apologize. I've done the wrong thing. I've been a bad father. I didn't respect your mother, and I taught you to disrespect your mother. And starting today, that's not happening anymore. So that's a great start. That's hope. But they didn't still know how to actually get on the same page. So that's what
right.
the book is about. It has a lot of great parenting advice. 80 to 90% is great parenting advice. You don't even have to be a Christian to benefit from it. But there is this underpinning all the way throughout of how do you see things the same, get on the same page, adapt at the same time to the child's changes, and be able to bring that child into a great adult who makes mature, independent decisions, has had a Christian basis for going out into the world, and they're able to go out and be self-sufficient and just do a great job with life. And that's the ultimate goal and the mutual purpose. One thing I would say also for as we get into it from the beginning, one of the things I say all throughout the book is this phrase, for the sake of the child.
Hmm.
Now, I realize some people listening are in contentious divorce situations. They're like, how can I ever get along with somebody like that? And
Right.
and there are assessments you can do. Sometimes you just can't come to agreement. But I've seen a lot of divorces that do have agreement, that it actually um, the divorce actually takes some pressure off and they're able to function better as parents than they were married. But this woman that I was talking about, she almost divorced her husband to try to get away from the situation, right? And then she realized we're always going to parent together. That's not
Right.
going to solve a single thing. We've got to go back to the bottom. So you have to always think about, what am I doing for the sake of the child? It is so easy to damage a child in different ways. Your disputes damage a child. It's very clear statistically.
Sure.
So you have to find a way to be mature, to be humble, and to find a way to join together for the sake of the child to have a common parenting plan. That doesn't mean it's easy, and there's ways to resolve those conflicts we can talk about, but it starts at the beginning of resolving that we're going to find a way to agree. That's the way we're going to do it.
I love that the whole program works together like this, like you were just talking about the synergy of all the different pieces. In terms of the 7 day practical faith, the idea really from so many guys that I talk to is, where did I go wrong? And then that's when they're too far gone. But a lot of guys are coming and going, look, I'm approaching this. How can
Mhm.
I change? How can I avoid going down this path where we're out of options? We can't talk anymore, and so on. And so if you follow the 7 day practical faith, and that's going to give you a much better chance of accomplishing the action steps in unison parenting then, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of different ways I would respond to that, so I'm trying to figure out the first way I want to go. Let me drop back to the 7 day practical faith for a moment, and
Sure.
just the idea of how we deal with crises like that. Because what you're talking about is somebody saying, "I see a looming crisis,
Yes.
and I
Right.
want to figure out how I can deal with it." And that was what my first book was about, was Christian response to crisis. It's called the Next Thing, a Christian model for dealing with crisis in personal life. So the next thing, actually, the idea of it started, to rewind to sitting in the car outside the psychiatric hospital. My wife had tried to commit suicide the day before. It wasn't obvious to me at first that she had overdosed intentionally. They let me know when they released her from the hospital that I needed to take her directly to the psych hospital. And we're sitting outside there in the car, turn off the car, waiting to go in to, we don't even know what this is going to be. And Sarah turns to me and says, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "We're going to do the next thing because we don't know what's up. We're going to do the next thing. And then we'll do the next thing after that and the next thing after that. And we're just going to keep doing next things until we get through this." And to be honest, Rory, we have been doing next things for 20 years.
Wow.
There's always a next thing when it comes to depression. And so the point of that is, I started thinking through this idea of, when you get into a crisis, you want to boil the ocean. You think of every combination of things that can go wrong, and you try to solve them all at once. When I flew to India for the first time. My mother was paranoid about it. It was right after that jet went down that is still missing,
Oh,
right? They
geez.
just had some terror stuff at some hotels over there. She
Right.
thought I was going to die 14 different ways all at once. I was like, "Mom, I'm going to give you some good news. I can only die one of those ways. It's not going to be all 14, but I'm not going to die either." But we can let it get too big for us, right?
Right.
And so I have this model that talks about simplify, trust, rest, and grieve. And the grieve is not grieving after the crisis, it's grieving your way through the crisis. Because sometimes as you're going through the crisis, things are falling apart one by one that you can't control. And you grieve the loss of those things as you're in the middle of the crisis, realizing that they may be gone. Um, I just wanted to bring this up because I have the best man for my wedding is going through a crisis right now, and his brother is dying of cancer. He lives several states away. His older brother, his older brother is very alone, nobody around him really to speak of, friends, no support system. And so my best man is just, he just started freaking out about it. And what can I do to help him? And I can fly up here and then I can fly up here. And but I need to book flights, but this is a problem. Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, simplify, simplify. You don't have to solve your flight 2 months from now. Okay. What you have to do is figure out, what is the next thing you need to do. And he and his family all started down this path of simplifying and doing the next thing. And their decisions have been so great, Rory, as a result of that. They started working through basic things like, does he need to go on hospice? Yes. Okay. And even today, the hospice people are coming in, taking care of him, and he agreed to that. Um, but just basic things like, they were trying to figure out what are we going to do with the cat when he dies? It's like, don't worry about the cat yet. These things can all weigh on you. They're not, illegitimate concerns, but you don't have to solve them now. Solve the next thing. I was like, don't book that ticket yet. Just let things unfold a little bit. Simplify. Figure out what he needs today. His house is a mess. Get him a housekeeper, right? Do those kinds of things to just get through it. And yesterday he comes back and he says, I almost booked that flight in June for 5 days. And now that I'm talking with him, there's so much he wants to do. He's feeling a little more energy. And I think I really need 10 days. I said, that's great. I'm glad you didn't book that flight. Right. So
Right.
that's just an example of the kinds of things we tend to do. So my message is if you're in a crisis, look for ways to simplify, to focus on just the next thing in front of you, to to trust in God and to trust in the people God brings to you. And that's a discernment thing. To find time to rest, because we just go a mile a minute in a crisis and our minds are always going, even if our bodies aren't, right?
Right.
And then to grieve your way through a crisis. And so that's why I want to say to some of these folks, I was just struck by you saying that they're seeing this looming crisis. I'd like to prepare some people for the crisis.
I'm glad you picked up on that and went that direction with it. I really am. I love the advice, first of all, the next thing, because I mean, it seems so basic, but it's what nobody does.
Exactly.
All I see
Exactly.
anymore are people being totally, and the word that I hate the most is overwhelmed, right?
Hmm.
I'm just overwhelmed. What's wrong?
Yes.
I'm just overwhelmed. And I hear it from everybody, men and women, everywhere. And it's like, why? Because I'm trying to, like you just said, and I've never heard it before, but I love it, boil the ocean. I'm trying to take care of everything that might come up and that is here all at once, all in one shot. And you're like, brother, to pick one thing, you know, just slow down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's great practical advice to just the next thing it. That's obviously what that book's about then is, steps on how to sift through the rubble and get to that point and be able to make the decision about what's the next thing.
Yeah, and it's not a thick book. I made it to where you could be in a crisis. I mean, it's about 100 pages, but it's big font, double spaced. I tried to make it to where you could be in the middle of a crisis and find time to read this book.
Oh, good.
And
Okay.
so in fact that's what my friend is doing, and one great thing that I've heard, even though I walked through some of my crises, some of them were work related, a lot of them were health related. People come back to me and say, I felt like you were walking through my crisis with me
Hmm.
because it's a general purpose kind of model that a lot of people can leverage. So yeah, that's what I would just recommend thinking about those principles. If you want to buy the book, that's great too. But
There you go.
think about those think about those principles as you're going through a crisis.
Awesome. Now, all the books are available on your website then, right?
They are.
Okay.
They're on the major sellers as well. I love it when you buy
Cool.
from me. We can cut out the middleman on some things, but
Right on.
but yeah, they're all out there.
We will make sure we have that link in the show notes for everybody. Okay. So if you want to buy direct from Cecil, then we can, hook you up with that and they'll have a link. I am curious. I mean, I love the way this has, kind of been coming full circle between, Christian practice, parenting together, handling crisis, because there's, I mean, you could just go in that circle for
Yes.
for a while, about I want to live more like a Christian. I've got to parent together and not, cause the issue. I do see a crisis coming if I can't get this done, and then the world goes on and on. You have a couple other books though. I'm curious what those are about because you seem to have touched so many other topics here. One I think is From Comfort Zone to Trust Zone, and the other one is Live Like You're Loved. You care to talk briefly about either one of those while we're talking
Uh,
about your books?
I sure will. Thank you. I think from comfort zone to trust zone may have a lot of application for many, many people, for
Okay.
many men. Um, I think we can get into where we're very comfortable with where we are, but sometimes we're called to come out of our comfort zone and into what I call the trust zone, where Jesus is calling us.
Mm.
The book goes through a dozen stories from the Bible where Jesus calls people out of comfort zones into his trust zone to take a risk and to serve him and to grow their faith as a result of doing that. So sometimes taking a risk is just simply doing the thing that we know is right in front of us that we should be doing. But it's interesting that in the book, I hit on some comfort zones. One of the comments I get is, you talked about comfort zones I didn't know I had. And I didn't
Hmm.
realize how much I had insulated myself in different ways, how much I am not taking risks, either just as an individual or for Jesus. I'm not taking risks. I'm very comfortable with my life to the point that I'm stagnant. And I didn't think I was, and it's not always, I got to go to Africa and be a missionary. It's not that kind of thing necessarily, although that's something you could be called to do. But sometimes it's simply, well, how can I get outside myself to make amends with that person who has a different political viewpoint than me?
Ah,
How can we
wow.
get back together? Boy, that is a trust zone, right? And we build comfort zones around ourselves. Um, what do I put my faith in? Am I putting it in a political leader? Am I putting it in Christ? Who is my leader, really? So things like that are in there, and just the whole idea of um, the way Jesus challenges us. And if we read Scripture, and especially the ones that we see, I take those stories and I map them to today. Now, one thing I talk about the trust zone is one of my habits that I love, one of my pleasures, is going up in tall towers. So I've traveled a lot internationally. I used to travel a lot on business. And so I've been in the Empire State Building, the Space Needle, the Eiffel Tower, Taipei 101, all these different, Lotte Tower in Seoul, just all these big places. Never made it to Burj Khalifa, but anyway, I love going up there. And one of the trends, Rory, that they have had over the last 15, 20 years is to add a glass floor. Have you ever seen those? You go up
Uh,
in a tower and they have a glass floor you can stand on and see directly down.
yeah.
Yes, your
No.
your
Mm.
your physical reaction is
No.
like mine, right?
Mm.
And I I I have stood on them with one foot, but I can't bring myself to
Oh,
stand on 2 feet, even though logically, I know that's safe. I know they engineered it safe. I know that it's probably stronger than the concrete, maybe even, that they made it so safe. But that all your senses tell you I'm falling. Let me tell you something. The most evil one I saw was in Melbourne. I don't know if they still have this. It's called Skydeck 88. And they actually have a room that's glass that slides out of the building. And so when you slide out, it's the glass is like dark frosted. And then this is evil, Rory. They crash a sound. A sound is like glass cracking
oh,
and
come on.
breaking, and then they drop the frost to make it clear, and everybody shrieks because they think they're
Oh,
falling. They think they're dying. I'm like,
what in the
okay,
world?
it's horrible. I'm glad I looked at that and watched what they did before I went on it because I don't want any part of that. But
Ah,
anyway, a glass floor is similar, though, to how we feel when we're in Jesus's trust zone. We think that we're in
uh,
trouble. I mean, Rory, I started this ministry, and when I started, I did it part time. I had my day job. I was just doing it part time. I need my money, and I need to take
right.
care of my family. I
Yeah.
need that insurance, and so I'm gonna go do this, right? And just do it on the side. And the Lord kept telling me, get out of yourself. Get out of yourself. Finally, I got a clear message that was, this isn't going to work until you go to it full time. So I decided, well, I'll knock back my hours. I negotiated that at my day job. I'll work part time. Within months, I realized this isn't going anywhere. And so there was a prayer time when I'm thinking of all this. And of course, I'm fretting about money. And I hear God saying, so how much money do you need, Cecil? And I went, I think I know the answer to that. The right answer is whatever happens to be in my bank account right now. And that's like, yes, that's the right answer. Let's go. So I stepped onto the glass floor. I stepped out into the trust zone and,
Wow.
into that. And, you know, God just promised to sustain and has sustained us one way or another through the years that I've been doing it full time for about 3.5 years now. So that was my trust zone to go into, among others. So the point of all that is to say we need to inspect what our comfort zone is, and the book helps you do that. And then how do we trust it? What does it look like? When do we go into the trust zone? And to know that Jesus is holding us up, just like that glass floor isn't going to crack. It's going to look bad. Jesus is holding us up.
Nice. For a minute, I did not know where you were going with the glass floor because it just messed me up so bad. But I'm one of those guys. I'm afraid of heights. Can't stand it. Ugh, I can't even stand watching the videos on like Instagram. No,
Oh, yeah,
don't want
yeah,
to see it.
yeah.
But that absolutely makes total sense. So again, that's another piece of this puzzle. It feels like
Yes,
you're
yes.
you're sort of breaking down life into different pieces here.
I appreciate that, Rory, because that's exactly what I think I'm doing is I'm trying to look and apply scripture to life situations. You're picking it up much better than a lot of people do. It's not all
Thanks.
random. It's how do you actually, it's not just praying more, it's not just reading the Bible more, it's not just smiling at everybody. It's I'm in a crisis. What do I do as a Christian? I have a challenge to go out and maybe get beyond myself and to do something more. What does that look like? How does my life evolve? Uh, am I stagnant or am I growing? Right? Those kinds of things. And then, well, let's loop the other book in.
I mean,
Live like
there's
live
another
like you're
piece, I'm
loved.
sure. Let's go.
It is another piece. And live like you're loved starts with the dirty little secret that even great saints of Christ don't really know if God loves them or not. They're not sure. They know God loves everybody, but does God love me? And does God forgive me? And I know a lot of people who do a lot of things in church. They do a lot of things for God, and they're partly doing it because they're not secure. They're doing it because they think they still need to earn favor. So what I do is I walk through 4 scriptural truths and using Bible references to show that you are loved by God, you're forgiven by God, you're sent by God, and you're an eternal creature meant to be in eternal relationship with God. And then I kind of pose, given those 4 things, what does your life look like when you truly believe it, and how does it transform your life? How do you live like you're loved? How do you live like you're a forgiven person? How do you live like you're sent every day? How do you live like you're actually an eternal creature? And so those things I kind of walk through each one. Um, and we have to discard a lot of baggage to get there, especially with loved and forgiven. Boy, they are the foundation for the other two because it's sometimes easier for us to believe God loves us than that God forgives us because we know how hard it is to forgive.
Sure.
But, spoiler alert, where you're going with a lot of this is that if you can believe in God's love and you live like you're loved, you start fulfilling the scripture of love God, love neighbor. If you believe you're forgiven and you live like you're forgiven, then you start fulfilling scripture of you need to go forgive others. Leave your gift at the altar and go forgive and be forgiven. So it starts to change your relationships. Let me give one example of one that was hard for me was love. And it had to do with a person in my life who was very difficult, very difficult. And so sparks would fly when we were together. Maybe they thought I was difficult too. So when I was about to be with this person, I finally prayed, God, if it's up to me, loving them is not going to go well. It doesn't go well time after time after time. Would you love this other person through me? Let me be the hands and feet and voice and get out of the way and just love them through me and let my actions reflect that. And it went a little better, Rory, that time. And then I prayed it the next time and it went a little better, went a little better. And I started noticing something. After a while, my life was transformed because it started becoming more natural. It was amazing to take somebody that I really kind of detested in a lot of ways to start loving them naturally and feeling that. And then my wife said, "Have you noticed that they're starting to respond to you too? They're responding to you differently than they did before. They're feeling the love that you're giving them." And I hadn't realized that, but then it was making sense. So that's one example of how our lives can transform when we start to believe we're loved, we're capable of love. How do we live then like we're loved people, and how can we share that love with others? So anyway, I walked through all those four things, those four truths. I love that book. I put in there, it's a love letter to my wife because she's a depressed person who often doesn't believe that she's loved or forgiven,
Wow.
um, doesn't believe that she's sent, that she's an eternal creature meant to be with God. It's hard for her to believe that in the midst of depression. And so I really wrote the book with her in mind, but it has struck so many hearts. Um, there are people who have posted reviews to say, I drifted away from God and now I'm back after I read this book. It is just so gratifying to be blessed to hear that the book has blessed other people. So it's a very powerful message. And again, it's putting faith into practice. So it's yeah, I love all the connections that you're seeing. It's just trying to take what we know and applying it in different ways to how life really is.
Sure. For sure. I can see that. I'm also just curious. As you go through and you talk about all these different pieces, right, and all these different parts, and how they all go together, and you have stories for all of them. There's a lot of you in all of these. It seems like.
Absolutely. I had to live them all, you know? I think it would be inauthentic. I have a video series we're not talking about called The Legacy Tree. With that, it took me 20 years to put together that video series because I had to live it first. But the next thing, I lived the principles and I was going, but I didn't know it. I was like, why am I handling crisis better at this point in my life? And I started realizing here's four things that I'm doing. And live like you're loved. I think I had that paradigm a lot of my life, but a lot of people don't. So I lived it. And then comfort zone, trust zone. I talk about some of my own struggles with going all in for Christ, doing a lot of things that made me look like a Christian, but maybe I wasn't really until I finally gave my heart completely to Jesus. So, uh, yes, they're all things that I've lived. And unison parenting obviously comes out a lot from my experience with three kids that I raised, one adopted, um, my experience teaching parenting classes in my church to 700 families over 15 years, and my experiences in 30 years plus of church youth ministry, where I saw the results of a lot of parenting, and I got to know teens very, very well. Uh,
Yeah.
so, so all those experiences are poured into the book, along with some academic research and other things, that give it some validity. It's not all just hearsay, but there's a lot of things in there that I rely on as well. But things that I've taught when I was teaching these parenting classes, I would get playback, right, on how the different techniques worked. There's one technique in the book that I'm wise enough not to share with you, but there's one technique that is guaranteed to get your teenager to talk to you. It's probably worth the price of the book alone. And I have never, ever had a parent come back and say it didn't work
That's
out of
awesome.
all those families. I have had them come back and say, how do you turn it off? Now my teen talks to me too much. How do you turn it off?
Got it.
So,
Well, I would never ask anybody to reveal the secret sauce, so to speak. I mean, there has to be a reason to go buy the book. So
yeah,
that's
yeah,
wonderful.
sure.
I love that this is, a lot from your life because I mean, it really just makes it establishes credibility with all of it because it's not just theory. You've lived it. You've been there, and people want to hear from people who have walked the walk and don't just talk the talk. So I appreciate the fact that you're willing to put that out there,
Thank you.
from yourself in your own life. The The next question, really, in my mind, of course, is what brings somebody to want to, because you want you're putting this all out there, and maybe you're called to do it, maybe it's therapeutic, who knows? But you've done a ton. I mean, you've really outlined all these different areas of life with pieces of your life, and you've applied it to other people's lives. You're connecting with folks. But what brings you to say, I want to do this? What's your purpose? What's your mission in doing that?
Rory, I always felt like I was blessed. Um, and there was a point when I was 16 years old, junior in high school, all of a sudden it hit me. I'm about to go out into the world. And I know God has equipped me. I have a lot of talents. I know how to be friends with a wide circle of people. I have all these tools. What does God want from me? And at that point, somebody came along in my life, very briefly, but somebody who was a mentor. And I posed that question to them, and he said, um, God doesn't have one purpose for your life. God will have many purposes that will be unveiled to you as you go through your life. And I can say, Rory, I was in business. I was a volunteer in the church. I worked a little bit in the church as a paid person briefly, but I had a career in technology and believe it or not, also in sportscasting.
I read that. Yeah.
My major was in computer science. My minor was in broadcast journalism. I wound up doing both, sometimes at the same time of having a day job and a weekend job, night job, that kind of thing. Sometimes it was separately. But I came to realize as I was called into this ministry that everything in my life had prepared me for it. Knowing how to speak to people from being on radio and on TV was an asset. Um, Knowing how to run a business, I was in small companies at times. Knowing how to do a startup would inform how I could create this ministry out of nothing. Having had work experiences with people of different skill sets and cultures, I made six figures. I made 13,000 a year, right? I made all the way through just different things in my life um, from different jobs that I had. And I realized that my family situation also informed that to have the richness of the despair, of the issues, the the hope and struggle of bringing an adopted child into the family, um, how it impacts your kids when all this is going around them with the swirl of family health issues. Every ounce of what was out there, God hasn't wasted any of it in bringing me into this ministry. And that's what I feel, Rory, is that I want to take what's happened in my life and benefit and help other people before the hourglass runs out. That's what it is.
Nice. Love the way that you put that all together. That's nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, all right. Well, there's still one more piece that's floating around out there, the podcast. So is that a summary of all of this, or is the podcast separate, or what do you do with that?
Yeah, well, the podcast is it had different iterations because it first started more as like Sunday school lessons, adult Sunday school lessons that I was
Sure.
teaching on the Bible, the fruits of the Spirit. But then it evolved into what I call Practical Faith Academy, and I felt like back in my radio days, I really loved interviewing people. I've interviewed so many people. In fact, Gino Auriemma just won a national championship. I used to interview him back in the 90s when he was winning his first one with Rebecca Lobo.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So there's people I'll see on TV and I'll go, yeah, Herschel Walker, I interviewed him, and and I thought I loved interviewing people so much. Why not use that skill for the Lord? Let me change it instead of me just broadcasting at people and talking at people. Let me bring other people alongside me and talk about what they're doing and pick apart what they're doing in the context of faith and let them tell their stories and let me kind of help pull it out of them in a structured way. So that's how it's evolved. And there have been so many great people on. I have a guest coming up. Actually, I think it's about to go out right now. So, by the time people hear this podcast, it's out there. It's a lady who grew up almost homeless in Russia in an atheist family who kind of had her Scarlett O'Hara moment, I'll never be hungry again, right? She
Oh,
was like, I'm going to be about wealth acquisition. And she found a way to study hard, get a scholarship, come to the United States, eventually get an MBA, get into corporate world, climb the corporate ladder. And she gets to the top. I mean, not to the top, but she got to a point where she had the condos she wanted overlooking downtown and everything. And then she went, what now? And she went through a crisis that eventually led her to the Lord and led her to start working with homeless people and looking at the root causes of homelessness occurring and then reoccurring. And she tells her story on the podcast. It's an amazing story. It'll bring you to tears to hear some of the things that she went through in her life and yet how she is prospering and how dedicated she is to God and to this purpose of helping others to realize I went through all that to get to, same story, right? I went through all that to get to this place. So that's the kind of stories I love bringing out. I have a podcast out there from a couple of months back where it's about relief efforts in Tennessee after Hurricane Helene. You heard about North Carolina, but on the other side of the mountains, they had problems too, and the
mm.
amazing God stories that are coming out. So, things that are serendipitous, things that just work so great. So, um, I love doing the podcast because you never know, it as a podcaster, you never
Oh
know
yeah,
what you're going to trip across,
you got
right?
it.
And there's so many great stories out there, and I'm privileged to do like you and to be able to share those with people.
That's great. I love that you're using all of these different, media also, from books to podcasting and your ministry and everything else to just get this out there. It's really amazing what you're doing, and
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm
Well, I hope some of
incredibly
this,
impressed.
honestly, Rory, I hope some of this is benefiting somebody else who's listening. I mean, I really hope that, things like the five C's and knowing some of the basic principles about parenting, just doing things for the sake of the child, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. I hope some of these are inspiring to people. And then hearing some of my story, I hope that that gets somebody interested in living out their story, however it is, whether it's through my help or other ways that they can get it.
When I first talked to you about coming on, I thought that people would identify with a lot of the things that you had to say. Having heard it all, I absolutely know that we have people who
Mhm.
are out there identifying with everything you're saying right now. I can't
Fantastic.
thank you enough for coming on and doing what you've done. Let me give you an opportunity just to wrap it all up for us here, okay? As we kind of move on and close up. But um, is there anything I didn't ask you about? Which is very possible, considering how much stuff you have going, brother. I mean, wow. But is there anything I didn't ask you about? Anything that maybe we brought up already, but you want to just make sure you drive home, or I'll leave behind advice for somebody. Any of those things. The last minute or two are yours. So
Oh,
have at it.
thanks. Thanks. Well, I wanted to touch briefly on the importance of families of origin in your marriage and in your parenting,
Okay.
because a lot of times we try to parent instinctively, and that will lead us to either parent just like our parents did, or parent the opposite of what our parents did,
Hmm.
which neither one may be right. So what we need to find and what I propose in the book is a different way to look at it of what is the best parenting style. And statistically, there is a best parenting style. There is a way to find a combination of love and limits for a child. But the thing I want to emphasize beyond that, because people, if they want to, they can find the book and read it. But what I want to emphasize is that it's important to change yourself. And that takes maturity, it takes humility, it takes really looking deep down to realize I'm acting this way because this is how my parents acted or didn't act. And to say, you know what, I've done some things wrong. Like I had an aha moment early on with my two boys when they were preschoolers. I realized they were gaming me. They were starting to play me, Rory, and I was like, why is this? And a friend of mine said, well, it's because you're inconsistent in your parenting. I was like, I'm not inconsistent. What do you mean? And she said, no, they wouldn't game you if you weren't inconsistent. And they're taking advantage of that. And I started thinking about it. I realized, I come home from work. I was working a real stressful job. Some days I come home and I'm so tired, I just go, whatever. Kids do whatever. I don't care. Other times I'm stressed from work and I'm very harsh and strict. Which dad do they get every day? And I realized they learned how to play those moods. So I had to become consistent. So it took some maturity and some humility to admit that. So, whatever your issue is as a parent, if you read something in the book, if you find it somewhere else through experience, whatever, just look at yourself with maturity and with humility and think about what do I need to change in myself for the sake of the child. That's the main point I would make there.
Wow, that's a great mic drop on the way out of the room too. So I appreciate that. What's best for the child should always be what everybody's worried about the most. Again, seems so simple, but so often overlooked. And appreciate you bringing that out and pointing it out to everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure to do so.
Yeah. All right. Teaching Christians how to live a 7-day practical faith. Author of 4 books, podcaster, leading a ministry. Cecil Taylor. Cecil, thank you for being on today and sharing everything you did. It was absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rory.
Thanks, folks. This has been another awesome episode of the Power of Man podcast. The reason we bring powerful men like this on here to tell such powerful stories and to talk about such incredibly powerful topics is because they matter and because you matter and because all of us, my guest, myself, all of us are here to help all of you to be better tomorrow than you are today. That's our goal. No one's going to be perfect. Nobody can go out and quote, boil the ocean. I'm going to steal that from my guest today. I'm going to use that a lot, actually. But folks, you just take one thing at a time. Take the next thing. Take whatever's right in front of you. Handle that. Move on to the next thing. Don't get overwhelmed. Trust in God. Everything's going to work out. The reason you can do all that and the reason that God is there for you is because, you have value and you matter. At some point, you just have to believe it. Until next time.